You've just finished eating. Your stomach is full, your body has what it needs to survive another day, and yet you keep eating anyway, chasing something sweet, something that has nothing to do with hunger anymore. This isn't a modern habit. This urge is ancient, and it might be older than you think. Here's the thing nobody tells you about craving something sweet. It's not a modern weakness. It's not something junk food companies invented. The craving itself is a genuinely ancient survival tool, one that existed millions of years before the first cake, the first candy, the first spoonful of anything resembling dessert. Let's talk about it. Somewhere in our deep evolutionary past, sweetness became a signal. In the wild, a sweet taste almost always meant one specific thing: ripe fruit, packed with fast, usable calories, and almost never toxic. A sour or bitter taste, by contrast, often meant unripe or poisonous. So early primates, including our own ancestors, evolved a hardwired reward response to sweetness. Not because it was a luxury, because in an environment where calories were never guaranteed, sweetness was one of the most reliable, safe to eat a lot of it signals available. There's a theory about this called the drunken monkey hypothesis, proposed by biologist Robert Dudley. He argues that our attraction to fermenting, sugar-rich fruit runs so deep that it may explain part of why humans are drawn to alcohol today. Fermenting fruit gives off a distinct smell, signals ripeness and abundant sugar. And our ancestors who could detect and pursue that smell got more calories than the ones who couldn't. That reward pathway, wired millions of years before agriculture, is still running in your brain right now every time you want something sweet after a meal you didn't need calorically. So the craving is ancient, but here's where it gets interesting. Craving something and actually getting your hands on it are two very different problems, especially when the sweetest reliable substance in the ancient world came from an insect that would sting you repeatedly for trying to take it. At a site called Cuevas de la Araña in Spain, there's a piece of rock art that's become one of the most famous images in the study of ancient food. It shows a human figure climbing a rope or vine up a cliff face, surrounded by what are unmistakably bees, reaching directly into a wild honeycomb. It's estimated to be around 8,000 years old, though honey hunting itself is almost certainly far older than the painting depicting it. Here's the wild part, though. This wasn't a rare, occasional treat. Anthropological research on the Hadza people of Tanzania, conducted by researcher Frank Marlowe, found that honey can make up roughly 15% of their total caloric intake during peak season. That's not a dessert on the side. That's a genuine dietary staple, sought out aggressively, often at real physical risk, purely because of how good it tastes and how many fast calories it delivers. And it gets stranger. In parts of Africa, humans developed an actual working partnership with a wild bird called the greater honey guide. Research led by biologist Claire Spottiswoode documented that these birds will actively lead humans to wild beehives using specific calls and wait for the humans to break open the hive and take the honey, leaving behind wax and larvae the bird can eat that it couldn't access on its own. This is one of the only known examples of a wild, non-domesticated animal cooperating with humans for mutual benefit, and the entire relationship exists because of humanity's ancient, relentless pursuit of something sweet. Now here's where it gets interesting. Honey gets you sweetness, but it doesn't get you dessert. Not in the way we'd recognize it. Dessert, as a distinct category of food eaten specifically for pleasure rather than survival, needed something else. Enough surplus, enough stored food, enough free time to actually prepare something sweet on purpose instead of just eating raw honey off a comb. That shift shows up clearly once agriculture takes hold. In ancient Egypt, by around 2000 BC, we have direct evidence of dedicated sweet foods. Archaeologists have found records and tomb paintings depicting small cakes made from flour, sweetened with honey and dates, sometimes shaped and decorated distinctly from ordinary bread. These weren't accidental byproducts of cooking. They were deliberately made to be eaten as a treat, sometimes as offerings to the dead, which tells us something important. Sweetness had become significant enough culturally to matter even in the afterlife. Mesopotamia tells a similar story. Dates, one of the most sugar-dense fruits available in the region, were eaten fresh, dried, pressed into cakes, and used to sweeten bread. Cuneiform records mention date-based sweets specifically, distinct from staple grain foods, meaning Mesopotamian scribes felt these dishes were worth writing down as their own category. Here's the thing nobody tells you about the ancient history of sugar, though. For most of human history, sugar as we know it today, refined, crystallized, cheap, simply didn't exist anywhere in the world. The plant that eventually made that possible, sugarcane, was first domesticated in New Guinea roughly 8,000 years ago. But for thousands of years after that, people weren't extracting crystallized sugar from it at all. They were just chewing the raw stalk, sucking out the sweet juice directly, essentially treating the plant itself as candy. That's not a coincidence. That's the same underlying pattern showing up again and again. Long before any culture figured out how to concentrate or preserve sweetness efficiently, humans were already going out of their way, often through real effort and real risk, just to get a direct hit of something sweet in its rawest possible form. And that detail matters because it tells us something important about what dessert actually is. It's not really about sugar or cake or any specific food. It's about a species that evolved to chase a specific taste as a survival signal, and then, once survival stopped being a daily, minute-by-minute question, kept chasing that same taste purely because it felt good. Here's the real answer nobody expects, though. Dessert didn't start when humans invented an oven, or a recipe, or a specific dish. Dessert started the moment eating stopped being purely about staying alive, and started being, at least partly, about pleasure. By that definition, the honey hunter climbing a cliff face in Spain 8,000 years ago, risking dozens of stings for a handful of honeycomb they didn't strictly need to survive, was arguably eating the world's first dessert. Not because of what it was made of, because of why they wanted it. That instinct never really went away. It just got easier to satisfy. Ancient Egyptians baked it into offering cakes for the dead. Mesopotamian scribes carved it onto clay tablets as its own category of food. Roman cooks eventually developed honey-glazed pastries called globuli, deep-fried dough soaked in honey, a direct ancestor of desserts you could recognize on a dessert menu today. Every single step, the mechanism stayed exactly the same. Find something sweet, want more of it than you technically need, and eventually build an entire tradition around getting it on purpose. You're standing at the base of that cliff face in ancient Spain. The bees are furious, swarming around a climber risking real pain for a piece of honeycomb they don't need to survive the day. And somewhere in your own body, in a reward pathway millions of years older than that painting, you understand exactly why they're doing it. You reach for something sweet anyway. You always have,